In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the use of force continuum. It's essentially a guideline that both civilians and police officers go by in terms of using force in a situation. So, defining the continuum. The use of force continuum is a standard that provides law enforcement officials, in particular, with guidelines as to how much force may be used against a resisting subject in a given situation. It is primarily used as a training tool for law enforcement officers. It consists of 5 or 6 levels, depending on who builds the chart. So looking at this chart from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, this is a use of force model. There's 2 different sides. There's one for the subject and one for the officer, or the victim in this case. As a situation escalates, the level of force is increased. So for a police officer, when dealing with a subject, they first go with verbal communication. If the other person is compliant, then everything's fine. If the individual begins to show passive resistance, which means like if an officer is trying to handcuff the person and they shake about or turn their wrists or whatever, then that's considered passive resistance, and the officer can use contact controls or arm holds and everything else to restrain the person. If it goes up to active resistance, where the person is trying to push the officer away or show some type of, like a little bit of irritation or whatnot, then the officer responds with either their OC, spray, or hand-to-hand moves, or their taser. Now from there it goes up to assaultive, which can result in physical injury. In that case, the officer can respond with strong physical strikes. They can upgrade the level of force up to an expandable baton, because that's considered a less lethal option. And then up from there, if the confrontation can lead to serious physical injury or death, like if the person pulls out a knife or a firearm, then it goes to deadly force, which an officer can pull out his firearm as well and take the subject down. Now all of this is based on individual officer perception. A better way of looking at it is with this chart. So we start off with presence, then we go to verbal commands, then open hand tactics such as escort holds, handcuffs, and so on. Then you can move on to your OC spray, then closed hand tactics, then your taser device, then you can move up to the expandable baton, and then finally your firearm with deadly force. Now for civilians in particular, this is how I have the use of force continuum laid out. For level 1, we've got presence. That means being situationally aware of your surroundings and everything that's going on around you, having verbal communication with your attacker, telling them to stop, to leave you alone. And then, of course, using personal alarms to create noise or distraction, yelling for help, and so on. For level 2, we move on to martial arts. If the person is trying to grab you or subdue you, then you can use kicks, throws, and empty-handed techniques. That's assuming if you know how to do martial arts or any form of close combat. If you don't know how to do that, then it automatically goes from level 1 to level 3. You're able to use less lethal force or non-lethal force, such as your pepper spray, your stun gun, your taser, and if things get really bad, you can use your expandable baton as well. And then finally, if the person pulls out a knife or a gun or a crowbar or just any kind of weapon that can cause serious bodily harm or death, then you can pull out your firearm as well. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I can't give you legal advice, but these are just suggestions. The use of force continuum, like I said, is a guideline for how to react to a situation, and the courts will be relying on this information, on your testimony, in order to prosecute or find who's really at fault. So like I said in the previous lecture, you can't use excessive force on someone even if you are the victim. You can't pull out a firearm on somebody that's unarmed. You just can't do it. And you also have to look at it a lot differently than law enforcement, because law enforcement uses force in order to make a person comply or to subdue that individual. Your purpose is to stop your threat so you can run away and get to safety. That's all that you should be concerned with. If you stop the threat, there's no point in continuing to use your spray on that person or hit them with a baton, or especially shoot them with your gun again. It's just, there's no point. It's just going to land you in a lot of hot water legally later on. So just got to keep that in mind when it comes to use of force. And please don't think that you can just pull out your firearm on somebody and say that you feared for your life, or you saw the attacker try to grab something or pull something out, because it's just not going to work. You're not a police officer. You don't have the protection of a police union to back you. You're just a private citizen, and unless you have a lot of money and a very good lawyer, I would not go all out. I would go by this use of force continuum and try to be very careful in how I react to a threat. Just because it worked out for George Zimmerman doesn't mean it's going to work out for you. In the next lecture, we'll start talking about personal alarms and how to use them for self-defense.